Welcome you all. Thank you
Yay.
so much for joining us. Today you are in for a treat, I hope. My name is Jennifer LaGarde, and my co-host over there, Darren Hudgins. We are thrilled to be able to be a part of your Q journey. You are welcome to join us at the URL that is there on that slide. bit.ly/FVF for Fact versus Fiction Q20. We'll share this again at the end, and you don't have to be there in order to participate, but it is there if you would like that. You'd like to join us in the slide deck, you're welcome to do that. Darren, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, welcome. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about, I have had kind of three parts to my life when it comes to work. One was I taught for 11 years at the secondary level, both from a social studies standpoint as well as CTE. I've had 11 years working for an ed tech nonprofit where I ran events, did keynotes, workshops, and curated a bunch of really awesome people. I'm going to pause here for a second. If you folks that are coming in, if you could mute your microphones, that would be great. We're getting some feedback. And I'm not sure, Jennifer, I think there's a setting on there that you can click to.
Yeah, I was going through it. I'm muting people too. Okay. But keep going, Darren.
Yeah, so anyway, so the second part of my life has really been in a lot of ed tech, social emotional learning, just a myriad of different things, including, of course, some media literacy and just a hotbed of topics. And most recently, I've been excited. I get to do a lot of consulting work and working with this awesome co-author who I'm going to let introduce myself, or let her introduce herself. If you need to get a hold of me, here's a bunch of information here, and we've given you the slide deck, so you can definitely do that.
And I'm Jennifer. You know, like Darren, I've had some different phases to my career. I'm most known as being a librarian, as you'll note by my email address and URL there. But I spent just as much time as a classroom teacher, a middle and high school English teacher. Then I was a librarian, and then I worked at the district and state level to support librarians. And then I also spent a number of years as a digital teaching and learning specialist. Now I teach pre-service librarians, academic, school librarian, and public librarians for Rutgers University. And I also do consulting around the country for school districts who want to leverage their librarians in more effective ways. So that's who I am now. And then I get to write books with this guy. And we are thrilled to be able to talk about our work around news and media literacy today with you. That work has to always start with a disclaimer, though. We like to start with two very quick caveats. First, you know, Darren and I are adults living in the United States in 2020. Of course, we have political opinions. We absolutely do. But this session and this work isn't about those. You have political opinions as well. And this session and this work isn't about those. This session, this work is about our shared belief, I hope, that no matter what our opinions are and what the decisions that result from those opinions, that they're based on facts, that they're not based on misinformation or disinformation that's been designed to fool us, to manipulate us, and to, most of all, to monetize us. So that's our first disclaimer. We all have those beliefs, but that's not what this work is centered on. And our second disclaimer is that although we're going to reference our books in this session, and I do say books, one is already out and the other one is coming out later this year, we're not here to sell books. That's not our job. We're here to change the world, as I know you all are too. We look out at the world today and the information landscape and see a world that is vastly in need of some shifts. And that is what we're here to do with your help. And so we look, even though we're going to mention our books today, that's not really what we're here to do. We want you to have them because we believe in them, but not because we're vendors trying to sell you anything.
And so Jennifer talked about shifts. And so I want to congratulate you 14 folks for making it here so far. Not only have you gone through and are continuing to go through this lovely pandemic, I mean, a lot of sarcasm in that comment, But you've also been dealing with an infodemic. Jennifer and I would say you've been handling that for a long time, but it's really come to head with all of this time we've had in our homes and in these small spaces, with really a conduit to some form of media for most people, but primarily probably the internet. And so we wanted to kick this session off right out of the chute by giving you a headline. And what I would like you to do is make a commitment. You can write this down physically. You can mentally do this. You can do something with your hand and go thumbs up or thumbs down, however. But you're going to keep this to yourself. And I'd like you to read the headline and look at what we've shown you and make a decision. Is this, in your opinion, based on the information that you have, is this fact, or do you think this is fiction?
And I want to just reiterate, we don't want you to share your gut instinct about whether this is fact or fiction yet. We just want you to tuck it away, so don't put that in the chat or anything yet. But also, I want to name this as the 911 toilet paper story, because we're going to refer back to it over and over and over again. The 911 toilet paper story. So you all decide, and remember your choice now, because we're going to come back to it later. Is the story fact or fiction? The story, this is a real article, but is the story fact or fiction? That was a question in the chat, okay? Is the story fact or fiction?
Based on the headline.
Yeah, based on anything you can see on the screen.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So that being said, we kind of felt like toilet paper was a wonderful metaphor for the times that we're living in when it comes to information, toilet paper or the lack thereof, especially when you consider the great toilet paper shortage of 2020 that we're all living through. But also, it feels like, y'all, that we are living in a really messy time without the resources we need to clean it all up. And so we kind of ask ourselves, what would MacGyver do in this situation? Well, he would take those materials that he had and he would build a bomb and save the world in 26.5 minutes. And we're not exactly going to do that, but we are going to take the resources that we have at our disposal and create some tools for saving the world. And that sounds like hyperbole, but we don't think that it is. We think that misinformation is at the heart of, or certainly is an accelerant in all of the problems that we face as a world and as human beings right now. And we want to help bridge the gap in terms of resources to fix that. And we're going to need your help in doing that today. So oftentimes, if you've ever seen me present before, we love to start with this quote: people lose their way when they lose their why. And you all know that to be true. You know people back in your districts and in your schools right now who come to work every single day and you can't figure out why, because they clearly hate children. Those people have lost their why. They all started this work for the exact same reasons we did, but they've lost their why along the way. Typically, when we have more time, we spend more time sort of unpacking our why of this work. But we did that in our Saturday session, which we're going to share with you in a second. But first, I want to just share this graph with you very quickly. This is some data from the Pew Research Center from 2019, in which they asked people to identify the major problems facing the United States in 2019. And of course, this is before COVID-19, but you can see that made up news and information was, it looks like it's kind of in the middle of the graph, but if you look at the top one being 70%, it's really in the top third of problems that people identified. And it landed above things like violent crime and climate change. So we're guessing, since you chose this session, you think this is a problem that needs addressing. We do at 2, and we are certainly not alone in that assessment. Darren, did you take over here, or is it still me?
Still you.
Okay, sorry. That being said, like I said, we unpacked our whys a little bit in more depth in our Saturday session. We had a featured speaker Q&A session with Q, and we have just put a link to that here for you to explore later. We're not going to unpack that in great detail today. But if you want to look at some information about how the United States and how American students in particular are failing in the area of discerning what's real and what's not in information, and would like to get real depressed, there's lots of information there. And of course, there's information about that in our book as well, Fact versus Fiction, Teaching Critical Thinking Skills in the Age of Fake News. I know a few of you in this room right now, and I know you have read this book. We're not going to refer to this book so much. We're actually going to be referring to our next book, which is untitled at the moment. We are simply calling it Fact versus Fiction 2 at the moment, but it has a theme that we're going to use for this session, and you're going to get a sneak peek at some of the activities in that book. And we're real excited to unveil those here for the first time.
Is that truth or is that fiction? Are
It is
we
true.
really giving them the inside?
We really are.
Well, if we could pick a theme. So book one was a little bit of our, a lot of our origin story. Book one was us really trying to, create the canvas of here's the problem. And then book number one was here's what others are doing and here's some strategies that you can use. As, anything, we grow as learners. We spent some time thinking, what are the questions when we go out and do workshops and keynotes and things like that? What are people asking us? And what people were really focusing on is how do we help not only ourselves, but our students become digital detectives? What can we do to help them solve these things? Not just telling us, like just giving us this list of we follow all these things, but like, can you give us some activities and some situations where we can practice it with our children and get better with it at ourselves? And so what we wanted to do today is spend some time making you or pushing you into that kind of digital detective lens. And so we're going to come back to the TP story. And what we're going to do now is give you more information. So when we first had you make that prediction, we gave you where it came from, the author, the date, and the headline. And so now what I would like you to do is read. We actually have 2 slides for this, so we're going to give you a moment to read these 3 paragraphs, and then we'll switch to the next one, and then we'll give you instructions after that.
So just finish up, take a second to read this first page, and then we're going to move to the second one. And then we will take a closer look at this story. And if you have accessed the slides, the link is in the chat room. But if you've accessed the slides, you are welcome to go to them and spend more time on the story itself if you'd like to. But I'm going to switch to the next page of it. I'll add the link back to the slide deck in 1 second here.
So this is the second part of the article, or the article continued.
And I've put the link back in the chat. And y'all, as other people come in, you're welcome to copy and paste that in there for folks who enter late if you'd like, if we miss it.
Are you saying we're all in this together? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. As always. Thank you, Carrie. So now we're going to use a tool called Slido to do some interactivity to guide you through the steps that we're going to be unpacking in our next book about how to be digital detectives. And we're going to hope this is going to work. Cross your fingers, the magic of technology. You all should receive the first question that we're going to ask you about this story.
So you'll need to open up another tab, and you'll want to go to slido.com. You can see it there on the left, and then it's going to immediately ask you for a code. I believe the hashtag is already there. So all you need to do is enter in the capital J, capital L 101. And then it should give you an opportunity to then respond to the poll.
This is a word cloud poll, so you'll only be able to respond in one word. So how does this story make you feel about the people involved? And that could be anything from the people in the story, the people writing the story, the people reading the story, anybody that's involved. But you have to respond with just one word. The good news is, though, that you can respond multiple times. So if it makes you feel happy, that's one response. If it makes you feel sad, then that's another response, etc.
Look at that.
All right.
My favorite word already, flabbergasted. I love it.
I know.
Condescending.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Mm.
And if you see words there that you agree with, you're welcome to type them in as a second or third response, and we will see that they get bigger in the word cloud.
So I'm not sure, Kay Muss, you will go to slido.com, SLIDO.com, and then it'll ask you to put in the code. And if you look on the left of the slide screen, you will see that particular code. You also, if you want to scan it on your phone, there's a QR code there that you could scan it with your camera, and you could do it separately on your phone if you didn't want to do it on a desktop or a tablet. I'm not sure how everybody's logged in.
Yeah, we're going to do a couple more of these. And the good news is if you leave that tab open, the slido.com tab open, then you won't have to log in again. So just logging in once will do it to you. Slido.com JL101 is the code. So that's interesting. Look at how amused is giant, silly, annoyed, and then some of the other words next to it. Although it seems to me that some of them are related. You know, there are some that are branches from the same tree. I love the hand on palm. That's funny to me. So also awesome. Thank you all so much. And that leads us into the first concept that we're going to talk a little bit
I'm feeling
about.
a little validated right now, though. They don't know why, but I'm feeling a little validated based on the word cloud. I'm just going to say it.
I love it.
So, really exciting. Not a lot of people have seen this. One of the frameworks for this next book is looking at this from a lens standpoint, from quadrants, thinking about it as a detective would when they walk into a scene. And what we've tried to do is break this up into kind of two, even though they're in quadrants, into an upper section and a lower section. And the top section, bias and access, are things that we have control over. So internal, so it doesn't matter who we are, everybody in this room has control over the top two. And so what we were wanting to do, or that we were planning to do by showing you both the headline and the story, was we begin to bring you into these two. How did you feel about it? What did you think about it? What comes out in you based on what you saw?
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate, you know, for us, we feel like the work of digital detectives, no matter what type of information it is, it's no longer just enough to look at one thing and decide it's true or not. We've developed these 4 lenses that we think that all digital detectives have to look through in order to truly examine, I don't want to call it a crime scene, but an article or a video or an image or any piece of information. And so by answering that first question, you have looked at this particular piece of information through the first lens, which is bias.
So bias, oftentimes we jump into bias against people, or bias against political systems, or all those, and there's certainly biases there, and that's certainly a part of it. From our standpoint, when we're talking about media, all kinds of media, I mean, you can even a tattoo on somebody's body is a piece of media. But when we're looking at information, we want to first really look at, well, how does it make you feel? What is it doing? All good storytelling oftentimes focuses on that emotional trigger because they want to draw you in to the story, and that's how you begin to make meaning. The second component to this is how can we get folks to press pause? And I'm not going to go too much into that yet because I'm going to give you some neuroscience here in a minute. But there's a reason why we want to push pause, because typically these emotional triggers are attaching to those biases. And then last but not least, which plays into that pressing pause, is we have to get on the logic train, not the emotional train.
Yeah, and just before we move on to the next slide, Darren and I believe very strongly that one component of information literacy as we currently teach it in schools that's missing is the connection between information literacy and social emotional learning. That all information now, for a variety of reasons, is designed to trigger us. And because triggering us, if we let emotion take the wheel, then we press click. And everyone needs click is the new currency. And so we therefore, all information is designed to make us press that click. So Darren, did you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sorry about that. So I'm in the typical, what we've all been experiencing all week, the Zoom room where distractions are going on outside and you can't control them. And you're hoping it doesn't impact other people's experience. But quickly, if I gave you the quick turbo version of neuroscience, we kind of have two brains. And I'm not talking about the left brain, right brain. I'm talking about both systems that are running the brain in the frontal lobe and then in the limbic system. We're talking about the amygdala. System one is what drives us 95% of the time. So if you think about when you go to brush your teeth, you don't think, you just do it automatically. When you fold your hands, when you walk, majority of what we do is both fast and automatic, and it's unconscious. And the reason that we want to do this stuff in that manner is because our brain's trying to do too many things at once. And so it's an ability for us to make things simple. You can see there it's highlighted on intuitive and instinctive. The second part of our brain, however, is that logical part. It's primarily in the frontal lobe. It's where you do the rational thinking. If I gave you a long math problem, it's where you would go. You couldn't solve it. 2 + 2, for example, you could solve quickly in the system one because you've done it a lot. Memorization of multiplication tables, for example, you could do that in system one because you spent a lot of time doing that. Whereas system two, you really have to think about it. Jen and I are having to spend tons of time in system two thinking about what did we learn from book one? What are we learning from what's happening now in the COVID situation? And then how do we make this logical, conscious thing that people can use? And so we have to kind of work slow, and you're actually helping us do this. The point that I want to bring out in the next slide is that the limbic system, most of what you get in media, which is back to what Jennifer was talking about the emotional triggers, is geared to the limbic system, which is the amygdala that focuses on fight or flight. And so they want to get to that right away to get your attention so you don't think about it and you just click on it. I will tell you a very, very quick story. My mother-in-law just called us the other day. She is in her late 80s. She got online on, I think it was either Facebook or Twitter, found something that was sent to her that said, I have a way of keeping you from getting the COVID virus. What did she do? I'm scared. I'm older. I'm subjected to this. She clicked on it. She paid money to them. It's fraud. She's totally been duped. She's embarrassed. She called us, on down the line. What do we do about it? She was 100% in the limbic system. What I really want to point out then is we are dealing with a lot, adults, we're focusing on this, but when it comes from a student standpoint or kids, almost all of the kids that we're working with the exception of some of you folks in maybe higher ed, and that's even questionable, is their frontal lobes are not developed yet. And so they don't even have an easy way of getting to this slow, logical calculating. We're hoping to try to teach them. We're hoping to work on that. Social emotional skills will help that. But we need to keep this in mind that all this media is geared to the limbic system.
Right. And if we can teach kids to recognize those red flags of where the triggers are, this, even if it's not me, even if this headline isn't making me upset, even if this headline isn't making me feel a certain type of way, that's what it's designed to do. And if I can recognize that red flag, then I can press pause and then try to do some of the protocols that we teach all the time. But we have to recognize the bias and feeling behind it first. So that's why we had you start there. Even a story as like sort of harmless as the 911 toilet paper one elicits some feelings, and those feelings are important. So we talked about bias, and now the next one in this upper half of our 4 lenses has to do with access. And then what we're talking about there is the ways in which we access information. And what we want you to do for this particular lens is just use the chat box now. And I want you to think about, how do you think the device you access information on affects your ability to determine credibility? So if you're looking at the 911 toilet paper story, if you're looking at it on a laptop, a Chromebook, an iPad, a Android phone, all of those devices, even a newspaper, because this particular story did appear in a newspaper, how do those access points affect your ability to determine credibility? So use the chat box to share your thoughts about that. Interesting, Brent.
Yeah, that's good.
Any other thoughts y'all have? Just use the chat box, the Zoom chat, to share how you think the ways in which we access information affect how or if we're able to determine credibility. Kaylee, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, and you're so right. But now I want to know that source on your phone versus that source on your desktop, or that source on your iPad, or that source somewhere else. How does the device that you're using to access that source play a role? Interesting, the URL, right? You can't always even get the whole page on a phone. Interesting. Reverse image step on your, search on your phone takes a lot more steps. Interesting. And I think too, right now, those of you who are participating in the chat, a lot of you all are focusing on browser work in the chat, but what if you're in an app? What if you're not even getting it through a browser on your phone or on a mobile device? Yeah. Good. All of that is so relevant, y'all, because let's take a look at how we actually get our information these days. When Darren and I were writing the first Fact versus Fiction, when we came across this information from the Pew Research Center about where people prefer to get news, this was a moment for us to press pause and rethink our work in terms of helping educators teach information and news literacy. In our work with schools and districts around the country, this has been a big focus for us over the last year, because as you'll see, as folks get younger, but even the oldest demographic that Pew Research, 65 plus, about half of them prefer their news and information on their mobile phone. And as that demographic gets younger and younger, then they almost entirely use their mobile phones to get information. And as you also so rightly pointed out in the chat, information looks different on your phone than it does on the devices that we primarily use at school. So if at school we're teaching them to look for certain aspects of authority, but we're only teaching them to do that on a tool like a desktop or a laptop, then how do those skills transfer when they're accessing that same information? Mobile devices add layers to the process of determining credibility. Darren and I have written a series of articles for School Library Journal, and this is one where we talked about mobile devices as being the way forward for teachers and librarians and educators of all kinds in thinking about information literacy. We have got to find ways to infuse mobile devices when we're talking about information literacy. Otherwise, we're doing our kids a disservice. When they get home and the research really matters, it's not for a grade, but it's because they're looking for something that really has real consequences. If we haven't taught them how to dig through those layers and determine what's real or what's not, we've really done them a disservice. So for us, we start with how does the information make you feel through the bias lens. Then we talk about the access point. Where are we accessing this information, and how do we start digging through and looking for information that'll help us determine whether it's real or reliable or not, depending on the access point. Those are two things that we have control over. Our biases, our feelings, even if we can't, changing them is hard work, we can work to recognize them. And that's an important step in this. And in terms of the device, if we recognize that we're looking at this through an app and we might not be able to find the information that we need readily to determine whether or not it's reliable, then we have control over looking at it in another way before we press share. Oops, I'm sorry, I've clicked off of that article. I told you about the article and then it went back there. Hold on just a second, y'all. I really am a professional. Let's go back to this. There we go. Sorry about that. That article clearly is linked in that slide, and so that's where I took it. Let me get down.
That was brilliant. Nice
I know.
product placement. That was
I know,
great.
right? What slide were we on, Darren? Were we on 18?
We're on about to go into 25.
Sorry, y'all. Thank you. I know your tech always works perfectly. So we've talked about bias and access. Now let's talk about the lower half of those lenses that we think are so important.
Yeah, in the lower half, so we talked about the top ones we can control. The bottom ones we can't control, and there's this strange, I don't know, I'll call it cartilage between the two. So for example, one of the things I want to bring up really quickly is this, that Jennifer talked about how you might get the information on a device. Well, one of the ways that you get the information on a device is through algorithms, which you set through your biases, which you set through signing up for this particular subscription or whatever. And this is ones that we can somewhat control, but our devices are set to that. So where that leads us down is in how do we start to figure out what the environment on the outside is doing? And that's where both the forensics and then the motives of either you or not you, of the people who are getting the information to you, what is their motives in the game? And so we're going to spend a little bit of time on the two of these. What we're going to do then is bring you back to the 911 TP article. So I want you to think, you saw the headline, you read the article. Now going into that forensic lens, we want to ask you this particular question, and it's back in the slido.com. You still should be in the same room. If you're in there and you go back to that tab, this particular question should now have popped up. If it doesn't, I think you can refresh your device or refresh it, but it should be active now. And it's going to be similar. Again, it's a word cloud activity, and it's going to ask you to put in some words. What would you want your students to look for to determine if that article is credible?
Right. What clues? Okay. Quotes. Awesome. What else? Source. Names.
Can the person who put in names, can you maybe be more specific? What do you mean by names?
The date, when it's published. Good.
Author. Okay.
Okay. Awesome. Links. The date again. Info. Names are getting bigger. Okay.
Photos, date. So now it's being specific to images. Nice.
Yeah, I like that. So these are all things you would direct your kids to look for as they try to investigate a piece of information. And you'll notice we're using a lot of those detective words in this. You know, we want you to dust for fingerprints. We want you to look through this article and see if you can find clues to help you determine whether or not this is reliable as a digital detective. And those things are all the kinds of things that we would ask students to look for as well.
Well, and I got to add, there's one in the chat. Claire wrote, there's no actual people named in the article, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Also, we sanitized it a bit for you. And this is one of the things in the old, the 2016 Chegg thing, the Stanford piece that came out, most of the adults and the kids couldn't tell the difference between sponsored content and the actual article itself.
Yeah.
And we really took out, or I stripped out most of that. Not necessarily on purpose, but as I'm reading your responses, it made me think. Back to the forensic pieces, which you guys did a wonderful job of using some of the traditional credibility tests. Like, these are the things that you need to do. Some of you mentioned both the authorship and the authority, both questioning why there weren't other names in there, but also there was an author who wrote the article. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. And then the two at the bottom, somebody did put it in there about let's dissect the photos. And we did make it a little bit more difficult by not putting in all that, but that's a big one in there because the media and the algorithms play to that page as well. If you do notice, there was a link back to another article that CNN or somebody had done talking about the psychology of why people are hoarding newspaper or excuse me, toilet paper. That ended up impacting that. And then finally, just going through on anything and dusting for digital fingerprints, which I think is what most of you were saying, why sources was the biggest one there. And if you notice on this particular slide, the dissect embedded media clues and the dust for digital fingerprints are also linked to articles. Jennifer referred to them earlier, but articles that we have written for the School Library Journal. So it might be something in your spare time to check out.
What's important for us to really point out here is that when we work with schools and districts, this right here, the forensics, is the start and stop of what we see in most information literacy protocols in schools. We start with these looking for forensics, these digital clues, and we stop there. And I think one of the reasons why we find then that kids still remain to be really, really bad at this outside of the school setting and sometimes even in the school setting is because we skip those first two steps. We skip in thinking about the emotional connection to the information and how that might affect our ability to even move on to this step. And we skip how the access point affects our ability to find these things. So that's why this is third on our list. We have to look at those first two things. Then what happens after that invariably is, as when we talk to kids and sometimes even adults, is we get the question, well, who in the world would do this? Why would people create false information, even about something as silly as toilet paper, if that indeed turns out to be a false story? Why would someone do that? And so we think the last thing you have to look at on our four lenses is the motives of the creators. And so we're going to do a separate activity, a different activity around that. That we're real excited to share with y'all, because one of the things we're working on for book 2 is an entire list of profiles of suspects who might be responsible for creating some of these false news narratives. And so as we have been looking at those suspects, we have been thinking about what motivates a person to do that. So the motives in terms of our lenses is what are the things that make people want to do this? And kids love that question. Why would somebody do this? And of course, some of the things that we ask our kids, depending on how old they are, to think about is who benefits from the sharing of this information. And that word benefits, what are the benefits? What are things that can be gained from sharing false information? As kids get older, we can talk about following the money, but the thing we love to look at is a variety of suspects, and kids are great at coming up with these profiles. We've come up with a few for the toilet paper story in terms of who might have created this. The troll is one suspect that we talk about a lot with kids. What motivates the troll? The desire to divide, diminish, and destroy. For trolls, this is personal. What tools does a troll use? They use personal attacks, sensational language, existing bias. How do they win? When they get attention, when they cancel someone else, when their response or when their information source goes viral. And how do they lose? When they are met with crickets. And so we're creating these profiles for just a variety of different potential suspects. The troll is the first one for this activity. The second one is the influencer for hire. What motivates them? Clicks, viral stories, money. For them, it is about cashing in. Okay, what about the tools for the influencer for hire? They look for outrageous or scandalous content. They look to make personal connections, etc. They win when they get attention. They lose when they are met with crickets. And you're going to notice a common theme, folks, in terms of how these suspects all lose. The next one that we're going to talk about for this activity is the blue liar. Y'all have all heard of a white lie, right? Well, a white lie is just a small lie that doesn't really hurt anyone, right? But the blue lie is its close cousin. It's a lie you tell because you think it's going to make the world better. That it's a lie where the ends justify the means. What motivates a blue liar? Clicks, viral story, a change in audience behavior, the effect their lie might have on society, or eliciting change. The tools that they use are moral outrage, implicit bias, sensational language, or clickbait. They win when they get attention. They win when behavior changes. And of course, they lose when there's crickets or when the status quo does not change. And then the last suspect we're going to look at in the context of the toilet paper story is the click chaser. This person is different than the influencer for hire because they don't care about making money. They just want fame. They are ready for their close-up. They use any tool that's available to them. Their win is all about attention, and their loss is when you don't give them any of that. These are just 4 examples of suspects, potential suspects. There are countless others, but we're working on a whole cadre of them in the next book. But here's what you all are going to do now. You're going to get a slide here in just a second, in which we're going to ask you to pick who you think is responsible for the 911 toilet paper story. And Darren, is this when we have to admit something to them? Is this when we have to reveal something yet? Darren has muted himself. There we go.
Sorry, that was all a plan. I think you didn't want me to tell them. No, we're all good.
Okay, all right. So here is your Slido for this particular question. Which of those suspects, thinking about the story, and we do have to reveal now that the story is in fact fake, but we're not going to tell you who's responsible. Which of these suspects do you think is responsible for creating and spreading the 911 TP story? The click chaser, the troll, the influence for hire, or the blue liar?
I feel like there's some people backing off. I saw the influencer for hire blow up, and then it started to go back.
One thing I'm noticing about this question type that I hadn't noticed before is look how it reorders them based on which one is the most picked. The answers have reordered from top to bottom.
Wow, no trolls in here. Interesting. Isn't that like the biggest one? That's all we hear about on the internet is trolls.
Hear of a lot of trolls. Okay, very, very interesting. All right, so Darren now is going to tell you the real story of the 911 toilet paper story, and then we'll learn who really is responsible.
So one of the things that, and I'm going to steal this a little bit from Jennifer, that we talk about all the time, is it's really important in front of people to show our failures. And that's really what this was all about. Was here we are, media literacy experts. I shared this particular story with Jennifer on my birthday. And it was a terrible birthday when it comes to anything exciting, because it was St. Patrick's Day, and this is right when the whole COVID thing was happening. So think about celebration's not happening. So I'm sitting around kind of whatever, probably grumpy, but I see this article and it makes me feel good. I'm like, look at these idiots, Jennifer. And so I send this particular article to her in a text message. She receives the text message, and then she proceeds to then share it with some of our other friends. And you can kind of read how this text thing went. She was harassing one of our friends, Tim, because he also lives in Oregon, where I live. And then Kristen, you can see, is like, oh, he already sent me this. So I'm like trying to make myself feel really good by sending it to all my friends. And of course, they trust me and yada, yada, yada. And here's how media spreads. So I want to dial it back a bit. I don't remember how I got that sent to me. It could have been in an algorithm, could have been on social media, but the origin of this story started on Facebook. And so this is the original. It came from the Newport, Oregon Police Department on March 14th. So this was actually, I was spreading it 3 days later. How I believe I picked it up, and here's where you can see all these lovely little algorithms pushing things into the article, because this is the snapshot of what it is. I think it's ironic that the Hulu Little Fires Everywhere is up there, being what was going on at the time. But if you keep clicking, Jen, it'll kind of keep showing the article. You can see that the Facebook article is then embedded into that. We didn't do that when we had you read it because we thought it was too long. And then if you keep going, you can see kind of to the end of the article, you can see all these things off to the right that might influence this. I did refer to the related article, which you can see there, Psychology Behind Toilet Paper and All Things. So it went from Facebook to CNN. Then, and I think I got it from CNN, which is what I sent them. So the next slide, prior to this presentation, I thought, well, where did this thing go? Let's just look. So I did a simple Google search, and you can see CNN is at the top, even though it wasn't the original article. You can see Oregon Live at four searches down, you see USA Today. It made it to NPR. If you click one more time, you can see, and this is just still on the same page, KTU and KGW are local Portland places, but then you can see Fox News, Newsweek, and The Hill all brought it up and put it out there, and it had a bunch of hits, and that's just the first page. So this is where it gets kind of interesting. So I thought this story was making me feel great about all the crazies. Why would they call 911? What is going on with toilet paper? I had even sent this to my wife. And so I think it was one of the mornings, like Jennifer and I were working on some stuff online. I got off the call with Jennifer, and Jan's like, hey, come over here and check this out. And so she was reading the Oregonian, and I had already shown her the story. I think I sent it to her at work. And you can see on the fourth page, in between the primary and the, I think it was the Oregon Lottery, you can see this article. And if you click one more time, at the very bottom of the article, it says the department on Monday clarified an important point. No one had actually called 911 yet about the lack of toilet paper. We are just being proactive and preventative. And it goes on to say about this whole thing. So they just made this up. There was nobody had actually called 911, but 911 and toilet paper gets clicks. People, in my case, thinking about those people are idiots gets clicks, all of these kinds of things. And I see some people putting stuff in the chat. Absolutely. This is how, manufacturing consent, manufacturing media, all those kinds of things for clicks. And here it was. If I would have never saw this newspaper, if my wife didn't know about it, never showed me, I would have never known the conclusion of this actual story.
So if we had more time, what we'd ask you to do now is to see if you want to reconsider your answer. Who really was responsible for this, okay? So, and we don't have that time. We've only got about 10 minutes left, but we do want to reveal then, of course, then the real suspect in this particular case was the blue liar. And what you may have already noticed there is that in this particular profile, we have linked there in the little card that he's holding up an article to the concept of blue liar. So that if you are interested in reading a little bit more about what that is right there.
So what I wanted to do is try to put this into back into this 4 lenses. As you can see the process, Jen and I, and mostly me, but I brought in my friend. The article was timely. The article was short. The article created emotion that triggered in me something to want to share to other people. The article created biases. Like, I wanted to feel better about myself. It's sad, but apparently I did. And so I'm like, it's easy to call those people or these people. If you look at the other side of what I did, I shared and we shared multiple sources. There was access, both mobile, desktop, social media, Facebook, and even the Oregonian, which sometimes we dismiss now, newspapers, because we don't want to pay for things anymore. And then what it did is started to slide down to this forensics piece. And so I was like, oh, is this a trusted source? Jennifer, you want to talk about the trusted source real quick?
Yeah, I mean, when we did the forensics poll, one of the words that jumped out as being really loud and big in that word cloud was source. And it's interesting to us because we think this is a prime example of how in our media literacy efforts, we need to start privileging information over sources, because even the most reliable sources, the trained journalists, our best friends, the police department, even the most reliable sources in our current news environment in which the race to be first supersedes the race to be most accurate, even the best sources get it wrong sometimes. And so here, Darren and I, the so-called experts in this field, we got this wrong because we trusted the source over the information. We didn't stop to think about the emotional aspect of it. How does this make us feel? Of course, we felt like, bougie snooty pants, that of course there's a bunch of dumbos calling 911 because we're smarter than the average bear. We like to think of ourselves as superior to those folks. So of course, but that is again a trigger that we should have paid a little closer attention to. And then
there's also a side to that too that we often gloss over is prior to the media jumping on to fake news and alternative truth, there were things like The Onion that was out there. And we knew that was fake news, but it was funny and we wanted to pass it along. And so there's a little slide of this, like, I sent it to Jen. Jen trusts me, therefore she sends it on to these other people. But there's a kind of 2 sides to this. And again, that's where it gets into this motive is, I can see a small town of Newport, Oregon, which is a tiny coastal town. I can see them wanting to protect their public resources. And I can see them wanting to prevent panic because they don't have the infrastructure to deal with it. But the other side of it, I don't know if they looked at the ramifications of, oh, this is going to go mainstream or go viral and all these people are going to hear about it. And so we have to really answer these questions. We have to get kids and adults for that matter, to question these things and look at all of those particular sources.
So for us, the big thing here is that we wanted to share these activities, these sort of sneak peeks into what our second book is going to be about, because we see current media literacy efforts in the states and in the school districts that we visit and have spent the last year and a half working in. We see them focusing primarily on this forensic lens, the triangulation, the looking for the details that might give us clues. And that's important. But if that alone worked, why are we all continuing to be so bad at this? And so we think that the key to that, for us stepping up our game and fixing a problem that we all identified at the very beginning as being one of the major problems facing our world, is that we have to add these other steps. We have to add these other lenses in how we look at information as digital detectives, the bias, the access, and the motives. And so we wanted to give you an example of how that could possibly look. For us, this is bigger, as I mentioned at the beginning, than selling a book. This is bigger than having the opportunity to present as Q. At Q, both Darren and I have educational passions that lie outside of information literacy and, quote unquote, fake news. But we've devoted our life to this because we think this is the most important work that we can be doing right now, because our kids are watching this unfold. They're inheriting the world that's being created by us, and our ability or inability to make it one that is full of rich, reliable information, or one in which we are swayed and manipulated by false information. So we have devoted ourselves to this. You are here because you're devoting yourself to this. And it's our goal to help you move forward if we can. So we only have a few minutes left, and we wanted to give you the opportunity to ask some questions, and then we will share the link to our slides again after that. But if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute your mic, you can do that. Nupur, I think your mic is not muted, and I don't seem to have the ability to mute you. So if you could fix that for us, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Any questions, y'all? Thank you, Brent. We appreciate it. That's okay, Nupur. It happens to all of us.
Yes.
New world we live in.
Finding tricky news sources.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, Brent, I'm going to jump in here, Darren, to this and just say that I think that one of the things that we unpack in the first book and that we talk about a lot is that one of the tactics that people who want to get us to click on information that is false or influence us with an agenda, one of the tactics that they do now is that typically they include both false and true information in their article, so that way, if we see something that we do know is true, then it makes us believe that all of it is. So I don't have like a particular source that I go to that always has sticky or tricky news sources. I believe most news articles now, because we are living in this time, and Darren and I talked about this earlier, we're living in this era where we all believe information should be free. And since we don't want to pay for information anymore, that means that all creators of information have to rely on the same tactics in order to get us to click. And because clicking is the new currency. Clicking is how people who are in the information business have to make their living. So therefore, they all rely on clickbait. They all rely on sensational information to some degree. So it's not hard to find stuff. But we think, in schools, because there is a tendency to not want to focus on things that are too political, the health crisis that we're currently in is certainly a wealth of information and misinformation that you can find. We also think that there's lots of information out there related to race relations, et cetera, that often has information in there that is not true. And 5 minutes on Twitter will lead you to a whole host of some tricky news stories that you can unpack. Darren, do you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to add one quick one. I mean, one of the things is after you go through several steps, we also recommend that you do take it through some of the sources like Snopes or factcheck.org or stuff like that. So that's, I mean, you can find a lot of information on that. And we've put that out there where it's also in our book. But then the other thing that I've most recently really appreciated, the News Literacy Project has a, you can subscribe to their newsletter. It's called the SIFT, SIFT, and they do a great job of sending you timely news things that come out, and they stamp it viral or fake news or not fake news, and they tell you why, and they give you some lessons and things that you can do with kids, and it's digestible, and it comes in your email and things like that. So I've found that to be helpful and sent some people on that. So it helps you a little bit with the tricky things that are coming out. But that's just, there's others. That's just one that I really like.
One thing also I would just quickly say is, because we have our hour is up and we do need to end the recording here in a second, is that Darren and I, we did a featured speaker talk on Saturday. There's some more resources in there. There's the links to this slide here. But if you do have our first book, while we don't talk about the 4 lenses in our first book, we do have an entire chapter that contains news stories that are viewed through a mobile device. And so those could absolutely be used and with the 4 lenses. Like, you could take the lessons that are in the first book and apply the 4 lenses to them for sure. And they are stories that give you a lot of wiggle room, because many kids think they're true. Those that are true are false, and vice versa. And we love that activity. So it's there for you to use as well. And of course, there's that book there if you are interested in that. And book 2 will be coming out by the end of this year. But thank you all so much. We hope to hear in the future. If we can help you in some way, don't hesitate to let us know.